All right, we're
All
going.
right. All right, great. Welcome everybody to today's Lunch and Learn series. This is the first in our four-part series on business tools. The first one today is going to be Excel for planning and projections, and we are going to be covering Excel for analysis on Wednesday. Before we jump in, we launched a poll. Kathleen, can you quickly read through the poll results so we know what folks' experience is before we dive in?
Yes, we have 50% of the people here have been in business for 6 or more years, which is not what normally we get for people with workshops. So that's interesting. 39% startup and 11% in between. 72% are professional or service and 28% are other. And then using Excel for business, a large percentage of people do, which is why they're here. And then we have the majority of people know something about Excel but want to learn more. The next group is they know a lot and are looking for expert tips. That's 28%. And then 22% know very little.
Okay, that's great. That's great to hear from everybody. Well, hopefully we can give you some tips as we go through this today and Wednesday. I would say that today's goal is to really get grounded in a lot of the basics. We're going to go through some kind of formatting and some tips. I'm going to use Excel itself, a little bit of a demo. And then on Wednesday's class, kind of an extension of what we're going to cover today. But if you've got ideas or questions, as we go through this, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. If you have a question about something that we're not covering, feel free to put that in the Q&A and I'll try to get to it, assuming I can figure it out. I am not an expert at Excel, but I've used it a lot of my career. Let's dive right in. All right, so getting to know Excel. So if you're not that familiar, it sounds like a lot of you are. It's really a spreadsheet tool. It is part of the Microsoft suite along with Word and PowerPoint, very common tools that people use in their business or in their personal life. Some of you may be using Google Sheets, which is, I would call it similar, but it is different. It is a spreadsheet tool. I generally prefer Excel. It is a little more robust, but Google Sheets has a lot of the similar functionality. Our conversations today and Wednesday will be focused on Excel. So what is it used for? It's primarily used for analyzing financial information or organizing data into lists. It is a spreadsheet tool, as you can see over on the right. Information is organized in rows and columns. Here are some examples that you could use Excel for. Financial is, I would say, probably the most common. Some of your financial reports that you can either download or create yourself, like an income statement, a balance sheet, a cash flow statement. You can use it to do a budget. You can use it to create a pricing model. You can also use it for sales and marketing purposes. If you've got customer lists, product lists by SKU, kind of any sort of marketing sales data that you want to gather or analyze. Operational, if you have key performance metrics in running your business, whether you're managing a project, maybe you're doing risk assessment for your business, trying to do understanding the business risks you have, or in maybe managing projects. A lot of folks wonder kind of what do you use Excel for? A lot of it is you can start with gathering data, but I like to describe it as taking the data, turning it into information, and using that information to make decisions. We used to have an expression at the company I worked at, which was it's nice to give me the what, but also give me the so what and the now what. Don't just give me the facts. Tell me what you think it means and tell me what you think we should do about it. So if you remember that as you're starting to think about how to use Excel, it's not just the what, the so what, and the now what. All right. So building your spreadsheet. Probably the most important thing to understand as you're thinking about this is deciding your format and deciding what you're going to use it for. What decisions are you trying to make? And here are just a few examples that I've got over on the left-hand side here that I've either done in the past with myself or with my clients. So before you dive in and start creating a spreadsheet, try to think to yourself about, like, what am I trying to do with this? What is the end goal? What data am I trying to gather? What do I want this thing to present to me at the end of the day? So an example might be, maybe you're trying to prove a hypothesis. Maybe, for instance, you're saying, I feel like I should be making more money. Why aren't I? The only thing I'm doing is looking at my bank account balance every day. And I'm like, okay, some days it's high, some days it's a little bit low. Maybe I look at my P&L reports, but I feel like I should have more money in the bank. What's going on? So maybe you got a hypothesis there and you want to better understand it. Excel could be a great tool for that. Maybe you need to use it to make a business decision. You're starting out with a new business, or you're creating a new product or service, and you think, I need a pricing and profitability model. I need to figure out how to price my product and what it's going to mean to my business. Am I going to be able to make money with this thing? Is this a viable business idea? Sometimes you may just want to organize data for reference in the future. If you start your business and you start selling products or selling services, and you're just getting started and trying to figure out, maybe you think, maybe I should just keep track of what I'm selling so that in 3, 4, 5, 6 months time, I can see that data and understand if there's any sort of trends going on, any sort of activity over time that's lending me to some products or services working out better than others. So an example might be, hey, maybe I want to get all my products on a list in Excel, and I want to have year-to-date sales. I want to have the price per unit and the cost per unit in one location, all in one spreadsheet. So I would say this is probably the toughest part when you're using Excel and you've got that blank spreadsheet and you kind of don't know where to start. Trying to determine what you're using it for and trying to picture the end in mind. Sometimes you might want to sketch it out on a piece of paper, because you may find that as you start building it in Excel, you think, wow, I thought this could be doable, but maybe it's not. So maybe sketching it out on a piece of paper might help. Sourcing your data. Different ways to do this. A lot of financial software tools, or maybe a CRM tool, like a customer relation management tool. A lot of these tools, you can export data right out of the system into Excel. That might be a good place to start. The nice thing about that is it's somewhat automated. You probably need to format it, which we're going to talk about formatting in today's class. And formatting is, on the one hand, you may think to yourself, do I really need to waste time making it look pretty? It's not about making it look pretty. It's about keeping it organized such that you can make decisions quickly. And you're going to see in an example I'm going to show in a little bit how getting your data formatted quickly can help you grasp onto key information faster. If you can't export data from your source system, you can also manually input it. You can copy and paste it from other sources. Maybe you've got 3 other spreadsheets that have got data in different places, and you think, I want to get all this in one place. You can copy and paste it from other locations. The most important aspect that I would encourage you to do is to ensure the data integrity of what you're putting in is solid. The old garbage in, garbage out saying that you've heard. This is anytime I'm looking at an Excel spreadsheet, like if a client sends me something, the first thing I do is I spend about 5 to 10 minutes just moving around the spreadsheet and looking at the formulas, looking at the way the data is organized to try to make sure there's no data integrity issues that I can see that are obvious. The reason it's important to do that is because if you start looking at information and you start saying, oh, what does this number mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? It could be leading you down a path of making a decision when in reality it's bad data. So as you're thinking about how to gather information, you want to understand where the data is coming from and make sure that data integrity is solid. So if you don't know where to begin, the best advice I can give you is to start with the end in mind, thinking about what you want that to look like at the end. What are you trying to gather? What's the hypothesis you're trying to prove, or the decision you're trying to make? We used to have a funny saying in my department at the last company I worked at, which was when you're trying to freak out and think like, what are you trying to do? It's like, keep calm, start a spreadsheet. Just keep that in mind. All right. So with that, I'm going to switch over to Excel, and we are going to dive in and show a little bit more of some real-time examples. And as we're going along, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, feel free to chime in. Remember, this is part 1. We're going to go through more deeper stuff on part 2. So, all right. So this is just, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview in Excel. It looks like a lot of you already use it, so I'll be fairly quick on this one. But just to get you oriented, you got your rows and your columns here. Up on the top, you've got your menus. There's a few different menus here. There's this kind of ribbon menu that is across the top here. There's also the toolbar menu that is at the very top. One thing that you'll learn when using Excel, and I should say this at the outset, there is so much to this tool. We are not going to cover nearly all of it in these 2 classes, but we're going to try to get to the things that you'd probably use the most. But one of the things that you'll learn with Excel is for just about every step or every task, there's a few different ways you can do it. There's not just one solution. So there's ways to do things through the toolbar up at the top, through this ribbon menu bar. There's also shortcuts, shortcuts that you can do things with. So just keep that in mind. So just getting oriented, the very top toolbar is kind of your file is kind of what you want to do with your Excel file. That one is kind of an important one if you're opening, closing, or saving something. The one you're going to probably use the most might be in this edit space, which is where you do a lot of your copy and paste or insert or delete. And then some of the other, format ones where you're going to kind of format your rows or columns or maybe the entire spreadsheet. Those are probably the more common ones. The other way you can access a lot of these is not just with this toolbar at the top, but these little kind of sub menus that are in here. Very similar type functions that you can access. I would say the most common one is going to be this home one. This has probably the most frequently used buttons that you'll do as far as formatting things. Insert is, probably not used that much. It's, draw as well. These are if you're kind of doing, illustrations, things like that. I would say home is going to probably be the more common one. And then maybe your data. We'll talk about the data one in a little bit more depth on Wednesday because there's some good tools there. And then you've got a spell check option that's under review. That's a pretty common one. And then view, we're going to cover. View can be helpful when you're using large spreadsheets and there's a lot of data. But I would say the more common one that you're going to use, I would tend to keep your menu on this home one because this is the one where you're going to be able to find things rather quickly. So we're going to start, I'm going to go through a few different examples of spreadsheets in today's class, and we're going to do some things on the fly, and I'm going to kind of show you some key functions as we go through this. But let's just use an example of a product list. And let's say you say to yourself, hey, you know what? I've got all of my products. I want to think about having them all in one page, all in one spreadsheet, and I want to use this for kind of reference, and maybe I'm going to use it for analysis. So the first thing to do when you're thinking about a spreadsheet is to decide the key elements to include and then determine what elements are going to be in the rows and what elements are going to be in the columns. That's important as you're thinking about organizing your data. A lot of times, the advice I give people is the dimension that has more variables should be rows. That way, if you've got 20 items that you want to cover, do it in 20 rows. If you've only got 5 other dimensions, maybe those are the columns. It just helps in terms of organizing it and being able to view things more simply. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that's a general rule. So in this example, I'm saying, all right, let's say we've got a product listing and I've got, these are the different things that I want to include for my products. I've got my name, I've got what category I think about the product. I want to know the date I first sold it. I want to know what my year-to-date sales dollars are. And then I want to include the price per unit that I sell it for and the cost per unit that it costs me to acquire it. Let's say I'm a retailer and I buy something and I sell it with a markup. So as I'm looking at this, I say to myself, all right, well, I've got six variables here for each of my products. I'm going to have a lot more than 6 products. So I'm going to use the products as my rows and the variables as my columns. So that's kind of how I think I'm going to orient myself for my first spreadsheet. So now I've created, kind of this sample spreadsheet. And this is just my product list. So this might be what you see if you export data from another source. And what I mean by that is the data is kind of just dumped into the spreadsheet and it's not like formatted. You can see how this is a shoe company. It's just an example I made up. But you can see here that this cell here says brown sandal. But if you look at this column, you can't even read it all because it's scrunched together. So this is an example of where you just get raw data dumped into a spreadsheet and you'd say, well, gosh, it's hard to digest. It's hard to really, kind of see what's going on here. Maybe I should try to format some of the cells. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about the basics. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this column width. There's different ways you can do this. One of the things that's nice about Excel is you've got a few different options in terms of how you want to do this. So, if I click on the entire column here, one thing you can do is you can, move your cursor right up to the edge of the column here. If you double click on it, it widens the column out as wide as it needs to be. I could do that for all of these. I could mark all of these columns. I could put the little crossbar up there. If I double click again, it widens out all of them. If I've got all of them marked here and I want to make them all the same, but maybe a little bit wider, I could do that as well. And now you can see they're all the exact same width. So, kind of different ways you can do this. You can see I made them really small, which is not going to be meaningful. But if I double click and I make them wide enough to fit, you can see that it's making it wide enough to fit the widest part of the text in that column. So that's just a nice way to do things and go, okay, well, now I can actually read everything and it's legible. And maybe I say to myself, I want to make these two a little bit wider just to give them a little bit space because it's a little bit more white space, a little bit easier to read. And then the next thing that I was going to look at is my date format. So if you look, like there's all these different dates here for, looks like I've got 2021, 2022, 2023, but they're all different formats. So I've got like this one says 12 Jan, this one says 6/5/23, and I'm like, that's not really that intuitive. How do I understand this quickly? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark all these, and I'm going to go up to my my home page up here. I'm going to go up to my toolbar up here, and I'm going to go to Format Cells. This is going to be a key one. This helps with your formatting. All sorts of different features up here. This one, I can format my dates, and I can pick my date option here, and I can make every date look like this. Click OK. Boom. Now you can see every date looks exactly the same. It's a lot easier to digest than the ones that have the month spelled out. It's just quicker to reference. The next item is the number format. This is all about personal preference for folks. I generally, when I'm looking at this, I've got year-to-date sales here. I've got my price per unit, my cost per unit. You can see some of these numbers are, I got 1,800, I got 2,200, 250. I generally find it easier to grasp numbers quicker when there's columns there. So one thing you can do is you can highlight all of your numbers here. You could also go up to your format cells. There are all sorts of different number options you can pick. This one, you can pick how many decimal places you want. You can decide if you want negative numbers to have parentheses. You can decide if you want negative numbers to be red. There is also a currency function that you can put $signs in. There's an accounting function. Again, tons of different options here. Find the one that works best for you. The other thing you can find here is that there's these little shortcut buttons up here. So this is a comma button up here. I use this one pretty frequently. This will format the numbers in the comma style. So I could mark all these cells again like I did. You just hold your mouse and you drag your cursor, click comma. Great. Everything's all formatted. I've got commas and all my things with thousands. Much easier to read, much easier to grasp when I'm looking at a lot of data. The data is organized. It's all consistent. The other thing you can ask yourself is if you need to have the pennies involved. Sometimes I'll use it. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I find it just gets in the way. So in this one, if you want to increase or decrease the decimals, you can click on these little buttons up here. Here I decide I'm not going to include the pennies for the sales. I'm just going to use the pennies for my price and unit cost. So that's just kind of a quick way to format things. The other nice thing you can do is you can move the text around if you decide you want it left, right, or center. These options up here give you the option to do that. Let's say I wanted everything to be on the right side. Maybe I want it on the center, or maybe I want it on the left. You can do that as well. Just some quick and easy formatting things to show you how that works. So the next example I'm going to go through is a cash flow summary. So this would be in your financial option if you're trying to understand your financial data. Again, you're going to want to determine your rows and columns. You want to pick the dimension with more variables should be rows. So here I'm trying to think through what do I want to show for my cash flow receipts and disbursements. I'm going to include some sales data, maybe product and service revenue. I'm going to include some cost of goods sold. And then I've got some of my expenses, but I'm not sure how many rows there's going to be. As I'm thinking through how to plan this, I'm thinking, well, the best way to probably do this is probably have my cash flow receipts and disbursements data listed in rows. And then I'm going to put my time period in columns. Again, sketching it out of my mind. What do I think I want this to look like? And what I've created here is a cash flow summary. So you can see I've got my revenue and my expenses going down the side here. I've got my months going across. Those are the columns. And you think, okay, I can just keep adding in another month as I get another month of data. So as we're looking at this one, you can see we've already formatted our columns. They're already the right width. We've formatted our numbers. They've all got, they're all, kind of organized. They're all the same consistent formats. You can quickly grasp onto the bigger or smaller numbers. The other nice thing about this is as you look at how I formatted these, is that the negative numbers, so my expenses are listed with negative numbers. That means that they've got parentheses around them. I find that a little bit easier than the minus sign, because sometimes you can miss the minus sign if you're not looking closely, whereas the parentheses are easier to do. And that just kind of grasps things quickly. So now you get into the point, you say like, all right, well, I've got this raw data. Maybe this just came out of QuickBooks and I'm going to format it a little bit and try to understand things a little bit more. So one thing you can do is you say, well, what if I want to understand what these results are by year to date? So I'm just going to start typing year to date results. And anytime you start typing, the data starts filling in. You can type it right in the cell like I did here. You can also go up to this formula bar up here and start typing in there. If you decide you want to edit it, I could just delete that, or I could just type it and it's fine. So now if I want to, put in some formulas here to add things across. Some of the more common ones that we use are the sum function, which is going to add up a bunch of things. So here, any formula you're going to do, you're going to start with the equal sign. We're going to equal sum. You'll notice here that a lot of the more recently used functions come up as a tool. So what you're going to do here is you start your formula, and then you say, what cells am I going to pick up to add up here? I'm going to mark all those. Boom, it's added up all those cells, and you can see, it's picking all of this up. If you want to see visually what it's picking up, if you double click on this cell, it'll highlight the cells that it's picking up. Another thing that can be helpful is if you want to replicate this formula all the way down, there's a copy and paste function. So to copy and paste, you can quickly go up to edit copy, and you can click that. And what you'll see is it's got the dots going around the cell. That means that your copy function is active. And then you can mark all your rows down here. You can go up to edit, paste, and that's going to copy your formulas across. There's also keyboard shortcuts that work for this. The keyboard shortcuts, if you ever want to see what those are, you can see up here. I'm using a Mac. This is probably a good point to point out that Macs and Windows are a little bit different in terms of the keyboard shortcuts. But you can see the copy function for a Mac is the command button and the letter C at the same time, if you want to do that instead of going up to the toolbar. So that's just a quick way to insert some formulas. Let's say you're looking at this and you say to yourself, wow, this is interesting information, but I kind of want to see things spaced out a little bit. What if I want to see all of my revenue added together and not just a laundry list of data added up? So here's where you can do is you can insert a row. One way to do this is to just highlight where you want the row to go in. You can go to insert rows up top. We can add in a formula to add our revenue together. You can see that's added right there. I can copy and paste over. Now I've got my revenue. Maybe I want to add in another row here just to give it a little bit more space. And then if you look what else down here, we've got a bunch of expenses, right? Our cost of goods sold, payroll, rent, utilities, etc. And then I've got my loan payments and owner's draw down at the very bottom. But I think what I've decided is that I'm gonna kind of put a subtotal in for my expenses first before my taxes, because I think that'll be probably more meaningful. Another way you can quickly insert a row is if you right click on the row you're in, just click insert. You can see it does it right there. Again, right up there. And now I think I'm going to add up my expenses here, and let's see what those are. It's doing my sum formula here. And now I've got that all highlighted, and I think, okay, this is great. And now let's say I want to understand what my net cash flow is. Before we do that, one thing I want to do is put a little caption next to my revenue so I know what this line tells me. So I can just start typing in total revenue. And down here, I'm going to put total expenses. Oops. And let's say I want that caption to stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to indent that. So there's a feature up here, these two little buttons here let you indent or outdent. The other nice thing about Excel is if you hover your mouse over the button, it'll tell you what it's doing. You can see that says increase indent. Click on that, it moves it in. Same thing with expenses. If you want to go in another couple spaces, you can do that as well. So let's get down to the bottom. Let's do a net cash flow line. So I got to decide how am I going to do this? I got to create a formula that is going to add up everything above it. How am I going to do this? Well, if I do a summation of everything, right? Let's do a summation of everything way up to the top. Oops, I made an error. Let's do that again. So I say, okay, I created a subtotal on my net cash flow. Well, here's the problem. Excel is picking up every number that is above this cell. So it's picking up everything in here. The problem is that you've created a total of your revenue here. And you've created a total with your expenses. So Excel is actually double counting all of these items because it's picking up each of these items and this total. So you have to be a little bit careful when you're picking up rows like this. So I'm going to say, well, wait a minute. I don't want to do it that way. I'm going to pick up these items at the bottom. I'm going to close my sum formula. Now I'm going to add in the two subtotals that I added up above. I'm going to add that revenue, and I'm going to add that expenses. Now I've got what really happened in the month. It's the negative 2805. So you just have to be a little bit careful. And if you decide to yourself, I want to make sure I got my formula right, if you double click on it, it's going to tell you you picked up this total, and these three items right here. So we got this formula. We think that one's going to work well. We're going to copy and paste that one across. I hit my Command C. I mark my cells over here. I hit Command V. It populates everything all the way over. Looks great. So now if you're going through this and you say, you know what? I think I've decided that I don't really want to have the expenses as a subtotal because I don't really need that. So I'm just going to delete that row. So much like inserting a row, deleting a row is very similar. You can mark the whole row. If you right click on the row, you can see delete is an option. You can delete that row. You could also go to edit, delete if you want to do that. Now I've got an issue that came up. This is what's called a formula error. You can see down at the bottom, it's got this hashtag reference exclamation point. You think, oh my God, what does this mean? What Excel is telling you is that it has got a formula that is referencing a cell that is no longer there. And if you look up in the formula here, it's saying I'm picking up, I'm picking up my B21 through B23. I'm picking up B8 for my revenue, and I'm picking up reference. What does reference mean? It is looking for that cell that you just deleted. So if you ever see a reference error like this means that you just made an error in your formula. And I'm going to show you the best thing about Excel, and that is the undo button. The undo button is your friend whenever using Excel, because you feel like you've screwed something up and you think, oh my God, what did I do? There's a button up near the top. It says undo, delete. Now it just undid what I did. Now you can see my formula works again because my expenses are now there. Another way you can also redo. There is a redo button if I wanted to do that again. If you don't have the icons up here or you'd rather use it through the formula, you can go up to here to the edit bar and undo delete is right there. So again, just different ways of maneuvering around. You can see we started with a bunch of raw data. We inserted some rows. We added some columns, some subtotals, different ways you can play around with this to make it work for you in terms of how it looks. One thing that is sometimes helpful for those of you who maybe are used to looking at financial reports, sometimes there'll be an underline where a subtotal is that helps capture your eye quicker sometimes. There's an underline, there's a border option right here in Excel. If I decide I wanted to have an underline above the revenue line, I can mark all these cells and I can click on this border section. I can select top border. Do the same thing with my expenses. And what you'll find is spending a little bit of time formatting things like this, it helps you grasp onto the numbers quicker when you go to look at a spreadsheet. And if I want to go find my revenue, I can immediately draw my eyes to the underline and know that that's where the revenue is. So just a little bit of a tip there. All right, I think we covered everything on this one. So the next one we're going to talk about is a revenue and pricing model. This is one of the examples that I gave back at the beginning. So as you're going through this, and you think to yourself, I need some sort of pricing model. I've got a product, maybe a service. I don't know what to price it. I don't know how much it's going to cost me, how much money I need to make. I don't know how many I'm going to sell. What should I do? Well, you can create a pricing model with an Excel. You've got rows and columns to help you with this. So the first thing you want to do is you want to determine what those rows and columns are going to be. So for here, I think to myself, all right, I've got a product and I'm going to try to determine how many products I'm going to sell per month, what the sales price is going to be, what the cost is going to be, and what my profit's going to be. And maybe I want to use this as a budgeting tool and think I'm going to try to price my product at a certain point, and depending upon how much I sell, how much am I going to make over, the first 6 months of the year, let's say. So as you're thinking through the decision point and how you want to set it up, you can use this and say, well, why don't I use my product dimensions as my rows? And I'm going to use this as a budget tool. I'll use my columns as my time period. This can kind of help as you think about your cash flow trend. Whenever you're using with financial trends, you generally use the months as columns because that's generally how financial reports are organized, especially if there's a monthly trend. Any of you use QuickBooks and you run a monthly trend report, you'll see that this is kind of how it's formatted. So if you wanted to use a budget, you could use the same process such that maybe you could create a pricing and revenue budgeting tool, and you could use that to help fill in a cash flow budgeting tool that includes your revenue as one of the components. So now we've got this tool and I'm like, all right, what do I want to do? I've set up my months. I've got January through June here. I've determined what my dimensions are going to be. I've got to calculate what my revenue is going to be. I've got my sales price and I've got how many products I'm going to sell. So let's go back to my shoe example. And I'm going to calculate my total revenue for that. And then I also want to have my cost per shoe. How much does it cost me to buy or make the shoe? And then how many I'm going to sell per month. And then what my total cost of goods sold is going to be if I multiply, those two numbers together. And then I want to calculate what my gross margin is per shoe on both a dollar basis and a percentage basis. And then I want to determine what my total profit is. So here I've kind of sketched out what I want my rows and columns to be. And now I've got to figure out how to fill in the data. So here we're going to use multiplication and division. Last one where you're using kind of addition and subtraction. So here just a little bit further of the dimensions to think through. Also show you a few tips about doing things that'll kind of speed up any different decisions that you make. So the best piece of advice I can give you if you're going to use this for any sort of pricing tool is try to group your products or services in like-minded groups. So for instance, if you've got, let's use the shoe analogy. If you've got different types of shoes, if you've got 3 different colored shoes, but they all sell for the same price, they're all men's dress shoes, just put all the men's dress shoes together because you don't need to do a pricing model for black versus brown versus tan. You can do them all together because they're all the same price unit. That way you're just not having to do many pricing models. It just kind of, cuts down on the number of, scenarios you need to do. So let's say in this one, we're going to say, all right, I'm going to use my sales price is going to be $120. Let's say I sell 8 and I want to know what my revenue is going to be. So here I'm going to start my formula. I'm going to start with equals. And when you do a multiplication, you take the 2 items together and you insert the asterisk. That is your multiplication tool. It's taking B9 times B10, 120 sales price, 8 sold. I got $960 worth of revenue. Now, how much does it cost me per shoe? Well, let's say it costs me $64 to buy or make the shoe. And I want to put in how much it's going to cost me. So I want to say, all right, well, how many am I going to sell per month? One tip you can do with Excel here is instead of having to repeat the 8, you could make this cell equal to the same number that is in the revenue. You just put, equals. It's going to say that is now equaling B10. So why is that important? Well, if you decide that you want to have a model that says you're going to sell 9 shoes, You can see when I changed that to 9, that also changed to 9. Save yourself a step. So let's go back to our 8. Now I want to do my cost of goods sold. So I'm going to do my same formula here. Okay, great. My cost of goods sold is going to be $512. So how much am I going to make? How much am I going to make per shoe? All right. Well, if I'm selling for $120, it costs me $64. I'm going to take my 120 minus my 64. That's how much profit I'm going to make per shoe. If I want to know how much percentage that is, well, the percentage is going to be my profit divided by my sales price. So I did 56. I put in the divided sign, divided by B9. It's 0.47. I think I kind of want to see that on a percentage term. So if you go up to the top here, one of your little buttons here is a nice percentage function. Just like the dollar signs with the pennies, you can make sure you can increase the decimals if you want to increase them, or you can delete them or decrease them down to 0. And if I want to say, all right, what's my total profit in terms of dollars? I know I'm making $56 per shoe, but how much am I making if I make if I sell 8 shoes? I'm going to take my 960 of total revenue, and I'm going to subtract out my 512, and I'm going to make $448 in total profit. So now I think, okay, this is great. Now I have an idea of how much I'm going to make if this is how much my selling price is, and this is how many shoes I sold. So what would this look like over time? Well, I could copy and paste this formula over if I wanted to. But I also know that I'm going to probably sell a different number of shoes per month. So let's see. Maybe I'm going to sell 9 shoes in February. Now notice how when I change that 9 in my sales price or my sales section, my cost of goods sold also changed, which was nice. I didn't have to change that again. Let's say I'm going to go up to 12 in March, 15 in April, because we're going to be growing this business, 18, and I'm going to get up to 20 by June. So that's nice. Like, okay, that's great. My profit per shoe is the same every month because I haven't changed my price and I haven't changed my cost. And now I can see my total profit is going to be going up, each of the next few months. So I did some nice copy and paste tips there to create these formulas quickly, help save me some time. One of the tips that you could do is formatting how you think about your sales price and your cost price per shoe. So let's say you do this and you think to yourself, gosh, I wonder if I could make more money if I increased the price of my shoe. What if I increased it to $140? Well, I can see my revenue just went up and my profit went up, and you can see my profit margin went up. But notice in these other cells, my sales price didn't change. And that's because we've hard coded in, which means we just manually typed in the $120 sales price. One tip you can do in Excel is to make your sales price the same in every one, is create a formula to basically say, I'm going to make every sales price the same. So now I basically said my sales price in February is the same sales price in January. And I'm going to copy that formula over such that anytime I change my sales price, it's going to change it in every single cell. So if you notice, I changed this to 160, it changes it in all the cells automatically. So again, that's a way you could set it up such that assuming your sales price is going to be the same every month, that's just a little bit of a tip to save you a little bit of time so you don't have to change every single column. So these are just some basics, kind of get you grounded on the formatting, inserting, deleting, some basic formulas, little tips here and there, formatting the dollars, the dates, the column widths, things like that. There's a lot of other factors in using Excel that we're going to get into in the next time, but I want to go through some basics here to at least get you started. Kind of not knowing where everybody was on their Excel journey. So I think that's everything that we've got in the demo. So what I'm going to do is switch back over to the PowerPoint, and we are going to be coming up on questions in a little bit. So please get ready for some questions. Looking forward to those. All right. So here are some things we're going to cover on Wednesday. Also open to other ideas. If folks have other ideas they want me to cover on Wednesday, I can try to cover them, assuming I know how to do them or I can learn in the next 2 days. But some of the things we're going to talk about is you're going to see a couple of these spreadsheets that we just went through. I'm going to expand on those to thinking about adding in some formulas to analyzing your data and trying to figure out how to know what to do when, and how to say, I got this data, what do I do with it besides just stare at it? Tips for copying similar formulas. We're going to use that pricing model and try to expand on it and create different scenarios and try to understand how to compare and contrast those scenarios. I'm going to talk to you about how to manage large spreadsheets. I've got some examples that I downloaded, just kind of walls of data that you could download if you've got a lot of experience with customers or vendors or products, and think like, this is a wall of data. What do I do with it? So we're going to talk about things like data sorting, data filtering. We're going to create pivot tables, which helps you take a lot of numbers and add them together quickly. We're going to talk about conditional formatting, which is a way for you to put some criteria in to highlight certain cells to make it easier for you to take your data or your decision tool and have an answer jump out at you faster. I'm also going to show you a search function, which will help you find names or data elements in, if you've got a spreadsheet with hundreds of rows, how to find that quickly, and how to you could even search and replace if you want as well. So that's what's coming up on Wednesday. If you've got any other ideas, feel free to speak up with your questions. And with that, I think we are going to go to Q&A. If we've got any questions. Kathleen, do we have any questions? Looks like we've got a little bit of time left. Kathleen, are you there? If you're speaking, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, many of the questions are related to the next session and when is it and can they have the link. So if you tell them more about it, I will put the link in the chat.
Yes. So so a little bit more about Wednesday's sessions. So we are going to we're going to cover a little bit more information about getting a little bit more complex, some of the complex stuff with Excel. I'm going to try to walk you through like that cash flow spreadsheet as an example. How do you kind of peel out some of the numbers and analyze it and try to figure out how to try to tell the story beyond what's just in the raw numbers, and how to think about some alternate, views of what your business might be doing. I'm going to show you some tips on quickly creating different pricing scenarios. And then I'm going to get into some, the ones that I went through today are more just smaller Excel ones that I created. I've got some sample Excel data that we're going to dive into that's got hundreds of rows of data. And I'm going to show you how you can work with large spreadsheets a little bit more easy. We got into some of the basics today, but that'll get into a little bit more of the complex stuff. So again, here's some of the topics we're going to cover, but if other people have ideas, happy to do that.
I did put the link to Wednesday's session in the chat if you go to the chat screen, but also to let you know that anyone who registered for today's event, whether you came to all of it or none of it or part of it, will get an email with a link to the replay, and in that will be also information about Wednesday's session, so you can sign up from there. It is Wednesday at the same time. It is from noon to 1 Eastern time. There's another question. Are there break-even formulas available to identify the minimum price point based off varying variables of cost to determine profit?
Yes, I just saw that question. Sarah, that is a great question. I will look into see if there's a standard formula for that, but it is definitely a great tool that business owners need to do, is to understand their break-even profit, especially if you're in a retail or manufacturing environment. So I will walk you through a break-even analysis and kind of what it means for people and how you can calculate it yourself. So I'll walk through an example of that on Wednesday. Any other questions? Kathleen, anything to add on some of the stuff that I went through today that you would chime in on? I know you use Excel a lot.
I do use Excel a lot, and I want to agree with Steve in terms of formatting. I often put highlighting, color highlighting in and things like that to highlight certain rows, especially total revenues, total expenses, things like that. I also use conditional formatting, which I think we're going to go over on Wednesday. I often do a green, yellow, red, either in the background or put a little dot next to it so things stand out. When the spreadsheet gets larger, it gets harder to view the data or to interpret the information, what this spreadsheet is telling you. You can get so caught up in the numbers that you forget to pay attention to what they're telling you. And so I often use formatting to help me analyze that. And also, one of the things we didn't go over, which you might want to show them quickly, is how to freeze the frames. Because when you get a bunch of months, I use that every time I make a spreadsheet. As soon as I start the spreadsheet, I pretty much freeze the frames just as a starting point. And in the meanwhile, somebody said the chat's been disabled. I realized you couldn't type, but I didn't realize you couldn't see. So yes, I will post the link in the Q&A and hope that that answers, that sends it to everyone. Because if it doesn't, then your only option is the replay email as for the link.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that chat feature, we'll have to figure that out for next time. So freeze frames, I've actually got that teed up for next time, Kathleen, because I've got some spreadsheets that have got tons of rows and columns. So that is early up on the list for Wednesday.
Okay, I just did put it in the Q&A. Can anyone who wasn't the person who asked the question, can you check to see if you can see the answer with the link and let me know in the Q&A? Meanwhile, Kevin asks, are there any templates specific to consulting or service companies available? I'm forming a government contracting company that doesn't make a physical product, have a physical office, overhead, etc., like the example shown in the demo.
So there are probably hundreds, thousands, millions of Excel templates out there. It really comes down to what kind of template you're looking for. If it's for financial, sales, or operational, if you're trying to think through what you're looking for. If it's a financial thing, there's a lot of different Excel financial templates that are out there. You can find them online. We've got some that we work with SCORE on with some of our clients that we help them with. And it really comes down to tailoring to whatever works for your business. So what I mean by that is a lot of the financial templates, as an example, are going to be revenue and expenses. Well, the revenue and expense categories might be different for your business. You can tailor them and change the names. But if you're a government contracting company, Kevin, if it's kind of different expense categories, you can change the labels to whatever fits you, your business. Hopefully that helps.
I also want to chime in and say that I have a similar type business, and so you can have expenses. They're just not the same, and oftentimes, especially if you're a service business, your expenses are a lot less, and so your profit margin is a lot higher. But things like equipment that you purchased that you're amortizing, depreciating over a certain life, or licenses that you purchased, or software that you're paying a monthly fee for. So it's similar. It's just that you don't have cost of goods sold. You just have expenses. And that's the primary difference between a service business and a physical product. You still do have expenses, but oftentimes they're significantly lower. And then Cheryl has asked, can you use these spreadsheets for nonprofits because there's no profit? Yes, you can. Again, I'm on the board of 2 nonprofit organizations, and we just call it net income. It's kind of like terminology, because basically it's not profit per se, but it's still the same principle as how much did you make in the end that you're carrying over to put to store for a rainy day.
Right.
It's the same idea. And Steve, you might have some more information about that.
Yeah, it's essentially, I agree with you. It's essentially the same thing. It may be called something different, but it's how much did your revenue exceed your expenses? Whether you call it net profit, net income, or net cash flow, the nonprofit is still going to have that. It's just that they're going to be taking that money and putting it in their reserves, like you said, for future expenditures and not distributing it to shareholders like a corporation might. So similar concept. All right. Looks like we got all the questions. Looks like we have. All right. So, Kathleen, while we wrap up here, and if folks have any other questions, we still have a few minutes left, so you can put them in the Q&A box there. But do you want to launch the mentor poll?
Sure.
So Kathleen's going to launch a quick poll. If you're interested in learning how to get a mentor with SCORE, please let us know. And while we wrap up, again, hope you enjoyed this today. Hope you found this helpful, and looking forward to Wednesday when we can go a little bit deeper on things. If you're not an expert on this and you don't know where to start, just start with something small. Maybe sketch it on a piece of paper. Try to keep the end goal in mind. Thinking about that, maybe designing a puzzle with the end in mind, not knowing how the pieces are going to necessarily fit together. But just get in there and start putting stuff in rows and columns, and knowing that you can add and move and delete things. Don't forget about the undo button. That is your friend. If you ever make a mistake, you can just click that undo button, and you can click it multiple times. It will go back, the last few times until you previously saved it. So, and just get started. And once you get started and start playing around with things, I think things will definitely be, more mind opening. So, and then just a reminder for part 2, and we'll get you the link out. You saw that in the Q&A box, but we will also get that out in the email tomorrow that comes out with the recording. So with that, I'm not seeing any other questions for today. So Kathleen, I think we can probably stop the recording. But we want to just tell everybody, if you enjoyed this webinar and you liked what you heard, and you're interested in learning more about other webinars we have to offer, you can find us on our YouTube page. Go to SCORE Greater Hartford. You can subscribe to our YouTube page, and you'll get notification about future recordings that go up for future classes. And with that, we will wrap up today's session, and we'll hope to see you on Wednesday. Thanks again for joining today.